Welcome to the Hope on the Hard Road podcast, where you and your family can find community, find encouragement, and find hope for the road ahead.
Instead of living in those what ifs, I want to live in the present, to live with him, to we're not guaranteed tomorrow. None of us are. And so why live in this hypothetical when you could just do your best today?
Hey guys, today is our final episode in our medical family series, and it's a good one. Abby Zachritz is an advocate, corporate consultant, speaker, and a mother of 5, including a son with disability.
Known as Advocacy Abby, she provides essential support and resources to families facing life-altering situations. As co-founder of the Connect platform, Abby empowers families by connecting them to over 1,000 grants, equipment, therapy, and financial support options throughout the United States, Canada, and internationally. Through Connect, she ensures that no family has to face challenges alone, making vital resources accessible.
You're going to want to grab a pen and paper for this insightful and informational episode. So let's get started. Oh, Abby, it is so good to see you. Thank you for coming on today.
Absolutely. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, and kind of your journey with special needs.
Yeah, so my journey began about 10 years ago. I'm a mom of 5. I was pregnant with my 5th child, Luke, my little surprise. And my then 18-month-old Wyatt had an accident. He had fallen into our pool. We were new to the area. We had just moved to Gainesville, Florida, and our lives went upside down, really, honestly. He was healthy, and then all of a sudden we were in this world of disability and diagnosis. And so I went from having, I no family members that I knew had a diagnosis. I've since learned that people have, because there's some that are not seen, or, you wouldn't just know from looking at someone. But I didn't know at the time of any family or friends that had diagnosis. And I really was kind of thrust into this world of recovery, disability, advocation, like learning how to advocate for my son. And he was, some people story are different. Like some people know they're going to have a child with diagnosis. Some people don't. Sometimes there's an accident. Sometimes you're born with a disability. It's all very different. And so because our son was so young, I feel like it was kind of both. He had a few words before his accident, but he was still basically, he was 18 months. So he was really young. He was actually quite miraculous. When we got to the hospital, when they were trying to resuscitate him, they ended up calling it. They had worked on him for 40 minutes and they were unable to bring him back to life. And so they brought me into the hospital and into the room, I'm sorry. And just before I went into the room, the nurse stopped me and said, "Hey, you can't go in if you're crying the way you are." I was hysterical, obviously. And I remember I had a big old belly because I was 7 months pregnant and I was wet because we had pulled him out of the pool. And I immediately straightened up and was like, nothing was going to keep me from my son in that moment. And they brought me in and they have this protocol where there's so many people in the room. There's about 15 people in the room. I guess this is something they do to help the parent come to terms that they're done, is they continue to chest compressions. And then they let you see them stop. So when you walk in the room, they're doing them and then they stop. And I began to just scream and cry and just beg God to save my son. I was yelling, "Jesus, save my son, save my son." And Dr. Bunalai, he actually was like, "Let's show mom his heart," because he had already looked, because sometimes they can miss those things with a stethoscope. So he literally looked at the heart to make sure there wasn't a faint beat or anything, and there wasn't. And so he showed me Wyatt's heart, and I was so confused because I looked up and his heart was beating. And so immediately the whole team just jumped on him and started working. So they actually have it in his medical record, spontaneous heartbeat. They had no explanation for it.
Wow.
Yeah, he actually shook the medical community that day. in Gainesville, were very scientific minded and just, I mean, he was a miracle, and they couldn't explain it. They had never seen something like that before. And to the best of my knowledge, they hadn't seen it since. And so, yeah, he was brought back for a reason and a purpose. I think part of that reason is what I'm doing today. But the journey began with him. And so we were in the hospital for 52 days and just waiting on some kind of sign of cognitive ability for him to go to rehab and for him to stop storming. And that's where your like heart rate and blood pressure is really, really high. Your body's kind of revolting against everything that's happened. And finally got the right medicine cocktail together. He stopped storming. We were able to stabilize him. And then a PT saw him track. There was like a red balloon in our room, and he tracked that for the first time. It was very brief, but the therapist saw it. So we charted it and we got him into Brooks Rehab. And Brooks is an amazing facility, but they had deemed Wyatt minimally conscious, that he wasn't really there in their perspective because they couldn't get much out of him. And I understand why they did that. They have a lot of kids trying to get in there. And if they don't see what they can work with, they kind of move you on to the next stages of, just life. And so we were there about a week, and then we went home, and I started doing research and finding all these alternative therapies, treatments. And I just knew my son had to have these things, but my husband was a pastor at the time, and I was a stay-at-home mom with 4 kids and 1 on the way. Like, money was definitely not easy to come by. And I just started finding grants, and I went online, and some were word of mouth. People would tell me, others were like, I dug and I'd find something, I'd call or apply, and they'd say, yeah, you're approved. And I just couldn't believe how, I don't want to say easy it was, but it was very simple. And so people would ask me, mom to mom, hey, how did you get to stem cells? Or how did you fly across the country with your son? Or how did you go to hyperbaric oxygen therapy? Or how did you do this or that? Or how did you get your wish? And I just would tell them, and I realized I had this wealth of knowledge that I felt like it was a wealth of knowledge, but I wasn't quite sure. And after, I don't know, about 9 years, I decided I'm just going to post like grants on my social media page. And then there was just an amazing like response to the need. And so that's kind of led to where I am as Advocacy Abby.
Oh man, Abby, that is incredible. I mean, so our audience, many of us are people of faith. And so just to hear that story and how God intervened, it's such a miracle, and it's such a beautiful thing that touched the medical community as well. And just the multiple ways God's using this. It's so phenomenal to hear. Thanks seriously for sharing. When you look back at those early years, what was that like for your family? What was that transition like? I mean, just hearing like the medical side of it. It's like, you're in the hospital, it's all emergency, and then it's moving into trying to get the medication stabilized, et cetera. But then how did that move into like coming home as a family and those early years?
Well, I'd say we have an amazing community and family, so that helped a lot. I can't imagine not having some of the support that I know a lot of people don't have a lot of support. And so having our family come around, my mother-in-law especially, she stayed with us for 3 months, would travel home, I think on the weekends, but like just a great community, friends help lending a hand and just taking the kids to school or to the other kids, because there was your life. What's really weird about a tragedy is the world keeps turning.
Yes.
Everybody goes on, but you're stuck in this hyper sensitive, emotional, tragic moment. And before you know it, a whole year has passed and you're just trying to come up and breathe. It was really hard. I would say my kids were young. My oldest was in 1st grade now, and now she's about to graduate high school. So we tried to keep things as normal as possible and do things for them, but it was hard on them too. And then I had a baby a couple months after Wyatt's accident. And so everything was very intense and fast, and we just were in survival mode. So my husband kind of took the reins of the meds and organizing that. He's an accounting major, really math minded. So like he figured all that kind of stuff out, put it on spreadsheets. And I took the reins of recovery and like all the cuddling and the obsession with Wyatt, really, because it did get to a point where I was like constantly like, if I had to learn to let go a little, like if he looked a little uncomfortable, I couldn't. It's like when you hear a baby cry,
Mm-hmm.
and any mother knows, like when you hear a baby cry, you immediately like, you might even start swaying, right? Like you're swaying, like I can soothe that baby. That's how I feel even to this day. When Wyatt looks or sounds uncomfortable, I have to intervene. And so it was years of probably a lot of intensity in our home. Lots of laughter too, though. We laugh at a lot of dumb things. Because you just have to laugh. Like you have to, if you don't laugh, like you'll cry. And
Exactly.
so sometimes you just have to laugh and make fun of the silliest things, or, just you got to make the best of the moment you're in. And I was in a really heightened state of fight or flight probably for several years, which is insane because that's a lot on your body. And I was recently telling somebody that I think it was about year three or four, I started to like sleep more. And just like I I never felt like I was quote depressed. I mean, I knew I had like a lot of anxiety with pools and like that kind of stuff, but I never felt like I was. But I think I learned that maybe I was. And I had a counselor confirm like, yeah, that's it doesn't always come in like this overwhelming, constant gloom. It can present physically too. And so, like, when my husband would get home, I would be like, all right, I'm going to bed. And it was like really early, and then I'd sleep till like 9, like we're talking about like 12 hours. So it just was like not normal too much. And I realized, okay, so then I started to go to some counseling and I figured that out. And it was so good. So good. It helped me kind of regulate my body, get out of this constant state of fight or flight, which is exhausting. And that's part of like needing to rest is if you're constantly on edge, your body's like, something's got to give, sometimes people get sick and I got sleepy and I just needed more and more rest. And so it was hard. The kids adjusted the best they can. I think it was hard for them too, though, because everything revolved around Wyatt for a while. It was his therapy. I mean, my youngest son was in a therapy office at PTOT and speech within the first week of his life.
Yeah.
So it was just nonstop. Like I said, we did our best, but it's one of those things where the whole family, there's a part of the body hurting and the whole family gathers to help. And so, yeah, it was a tough first few years.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing too, just the reality of how depression can set in and the help that can be found in therapy. Because, you hear this statement all the time, the body keeps the score. And for our families, it's so, so true. You're on emergency mode, you're just doing. And then at some point, the body's going to give out and it's going to say, no more, I got to stop. And so I think it's just a really important message that you bring up. And I'm grateful that you brought it up.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, me and Kristen have had the opportunity to speak to a lot of couples in this grief cycle, and you just how you explained it, it comes upon you. You don't know what it is. It hits you kind of sideways, and you're like, okay, now it's here. What do I do with it? And you do. You hit the ground running with a disability. You strive and you're working, and you're overwhelmed, and things get out of balance because you're working on a specific child and their needs. And then at some point, you redefine what life looks like, and you keep moving forward. So what you shared is very real for us. It's real for many of the families we come in contact with. So, we appreciate your transparency and sharing with that. One of the things you already talked a little bit about is navigating the healthcare system, and not an easy thing to do. What were some of the biggest obstacles you faced? And then, how did you navigate through that and get to the next step, and probably advice too to parents?
Yeah. So, well, we were actually not, my son had to get on Medicaid. We had over $1 million bill. We were in the PICU for 52 days. It was like, I don't know, 1 point something. It was big. Thankfully, we had a really good social worker at the hospital. My husband took a pay cut, and we really sacrificed financially because we could not afford the medical.
Mhm.
We fought for years and years and years. It took almost 10 years. And my son is on the Medicaid waiver now. So that in the state of Florida, it waives your income. So you can still provide for your family the way you want, have private insurance for your other members, but the one member is on Medicaid for life. That is not everybody's story. People talk about the waiver in Florida like it's a mythical creature because you don't get on it very often, and so many states are like that. And so much is not covered. But even on Medicaid, so much was not covered. Like they didn't, my son, we put our son on CBD to get him off of baclofen because it wasn't helping his spasticity. Well, when we did that, it was before CBD was legal. It was deemed, it was categorized as Schedule I at the time. So we had to go through all the hoops and pay for the licensing and get all this stuff just to get him hemp-based CBD that had no THC in it, actually, not even traces. And so we'd pay for that. And that's still, to this day, very expensive. It's a few $100s a month to have good quality, clean CBD. We have had to pay out of pocket for therapies that weren't covered by insurance. There's a lot of things that you might want to do with your child that could really help them. Like we did functional neurology. We went to a week to see one of the top functional neurologists in the world, Dr. Antonucci. It's not cheap. It's not that they are necessarily overpricing or anything. It's just expensive what they've created. And you get to use these amazing machines and do these therapies and see these doctors, and it's just not covered by insurance. And so we learned quickly that that's where grants could really come in and supplement some of those things. I was very successful, especially early on, getting grants to cover those kind of treatments or fundraising. And one of the things I learned was there's a time and place for fundraising. And I quickly learned that because before Wyatt's accident, we were the givers, right? Yep. We were constantly, my husband was a pastor. We were constantly serving other people. And we actually continued during this time. My husband didn't leave ministry at the time. He's in business now, but for several years after Wyatt's accident, he continued to pastor a church. And we were constantly pouring out. And then we had to all of a sudden be 100% okay with people pouring in. Yep. And it was humbling. I learned some practical things like, hey, let's be super transparent on what we're asking for and why. Be super specific. Like, hey, we are trying to raise money for a hyperbaric oxygen therapy chamber because this is what it's costing us each week plus driving time to go to this place to do it. It would be cheaper long term. This is the cost. This is exactly what it is. That was one of our fundraisers. And so we just quickly learned how to do it well. And we didn't do it constantly, but we were very strategic. Like, hey, we're in a position where no grant is going to cover this large amount. We need to have a really good strategy on how to ask people and just be very transparent. So that was probably one of the harder things, was humbling myself, humility wise, and just realizing hey, I'm in a position of great need. And one of the easier things to get a hold of was, but it's for my son. I think if it was just for me, I would balk a little more. But I was like, I can swallow all my pride when it comes to my son, and I can ask. And so I became really good at that, and I started helping other families with it. Like, hey, this is why your fundraiser's not working well. This is how you fix this. This is how you need to present it. I always encourage people to lead with transparency. It's very helpful. People want to give. People have giving hearts. I was still giving during this time. So if I'm still giving and then other people, so many people want to give, right? So just learning, I think, how to navigate the system, how to get the best insurance to cover everything. And it was hard. I also learned that if you don't ask, you don't know, especially with Medicaid. There were so many things that they covered for a couple of years. I didn't know they covered diapers. I was paying out of pocket because they're not going to tell you. They're not going to be like, hey, by the way, we can spend more money on you. They cover pest control for your home. Learned that one 3 years ago. And we were paying for that, because we live in Florida and there's bugs everywhere in Florida. I don't know if California has it, but Florida, it's just another beast. I learned they would present a wheelchair to my son, and I took it because it was the first one we'd ever seen. They told us this is what he's going to have. And then I learned oh, wait, no, I can ask for like a better model that's better for him. Okay, now, and then it kind of, then they get a little frustrated because you like have a little education and like, oh, I can ask
Exactly.
for better. Or I can appeal this decision that you said no to. And so we've done that. We've gone to trial, not like a law trial, but they have a trial process with Medicaid. We've won that, thankfully. We've lost them too. But I've just learned that you really have to kind of know what you're doing or find someone that does that can encourage you along that path.
Yeah, that is so good. I mean, every step of the way that you're talking about, like the trial and error that's involved in trying to figure out, fundraising, being specific, that's such good advice for families that are in this position, right? And then um asking what you don't even know what to ask, right? And then um yeah, it's
Well,
amazing.
and something, so many of the families out there that don't live the life we live, they don't understand it. So having the opportunity to share a story and share the details of what it really is, they just kind of, you kind of are handling it, so forth. It's behind the,
Yeah.
people aren't seeing it, but to actually expose them to no, this is what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. This is how extreme it can get. This is all the needs that are presenting itself, both time, money, and obviously you have several other kids too. So it's like sharing that with people, and then that does give it's a catalyst to be able to have people step into your life and say, hey, we can support. That's not our life right now. We have resources, and they're blessed by being able to bless you guys. So watching how all that transpires is really a cool thing,
Yeah.
and yet we're programmed to get things done on our own. We're programmed to be almost self-reliant, not in a negative sense, but just we're responsible. I should say it like that. But yes, there is a time for people to come into our stories, walk alongside, and they can offer something that we wouldn't necessarily feel like we'd want to go out there and say, please help us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just again, going back to like even that last part where we're talking about, Medi-Cal, and well, it's Medi-Cal for us, but anyways, Medicaid and program. It's so hard when you don't know what to ask. You don't even know what to ask. And so resources like what you're doing, this is phenomenal. I mean, we're gonna talk more about that, but just in general, what advice would you give to families that we started to talk about, just even that overwhelm in looking at the finances and the emotional challenges as you're raising a child and you've got siblings and marriage to balance and all the things? What advice would you give, about that overwhelm that you might feel going into this journey on the financial and emotional end?
Yeah, so on my website, there's actually, I'm actually not sure if it's on my website, but if it's not, I'll give it to you guys and then
Yeah.
you can give it out to anybody for free. There's like a checklist so that you can figure out through like school, home, all these different things, what's your priority for you. I think once you figure out like what are the priorities, because there's so much to do when you have a child with a diagnosis or disability. There's so much you can only do one thing at a time, right? And so I say sit down, trying to figure out what's the biggest thing you need to address and then go forward. If you don't know, like for example, I actually got this really sweet tough email from a mom recently just telling me how overwhelmed she is. She's doing everything on her own. She's a nurse and picking up extra jobs. She didn't know if her state paid for caregiver help or has anything like that. And one of the first things I said, if you're in the US listening to this podcast, is go to kidswaivers.org. It's kids with an S, waivers with an S.org. And they break down every waiver and option for caregivers and individuals with disabilities, especially kids, but they go up also state by state. And they refresh it every fall. So there's new waivers, like the state of Florida came out with a new waiver last year in January. They have that on there. And nobody knows about it. They do not advertise these things. They are not going to tell you. So when I thought of immediately, because the state she's in, there's the Katie Becca program. And so I mentioned that. I was like, you should go to this website. They walk you exactly through how to use it. And that's not my website. It's just one I found. And it's just super helpful, right? So go there first. See what you have a right to first in your state. And then that's where I would get a free Connect account, which is just my database of grants and foundations that support all kinds of things. So some of them help with caregiver stuff. A lot of them help with therapies, treatment. And you might say, well, I don't need help with treatment. That's covered. Or I can afford the treatment. I just can't afford this medicine. But if we can get you a grant for the treatment, you can then use that money for the medicine, you know? So you got to look at it kind of holistically. Like if you can get your pest control covered, that's $100 extra in your account. So if your Medicaid covers pest control, you might not be thinking, oh, I don't need pest control. I can do my pest control. Yeah, but if you can get them to cover it, then you can buy, XYZ that your child needs. And so I think when you start to look at it, like you figure out what you need, where the gaps are, and start just slowly plugging away. Because look, my son got on the Medicaid waiver almost 10 years later. So it was a process. Like it wasn't something I was like, oh, I need to do this. I did it and we got it. It takes time, but it's worth it.
Yes.
If you're just and take little bites. So I know personally, and then the clients I work with, overwhelm is like the biggest thing. So figure out what you can do, like make a checklist and then put one thing on your per day or one thing per week, whatever works for you. I have to get the application. Okay. Your goal this week is to get the application, print the application, whatever that is, and then just kind of write it out. And if you need to slow it down or everything falls apart that day, just reschedule. But don't ignore it because it's not going to go away and it's just going to compile like more and more. And so I think the biggest way would be to like figure out what you need to prioritize and then find the means to do that.
Exactly. And just the advocacy, like you're saying, be an advocate. It's okay. It's a good thing. Jump into that role and do it and push for what your family, your child needs. Mm-hmm. Keep going.
Well, knowledge is power. Like you said, we've come up so many different of these places. There is so much more offer than they'll tell you. And there is no place, but there are also agencies. I know in California, we got advocacy rights, advocates. That's something that actually is paid for through the state that help that process. And I know that's kind of some of the things that you're doing, making parents aware of what's actually out there, what they can pie into, and then yes, make a list. And if you get one thing on that list done, then you've made that much progress. And they do take time. So as that's happening, something else can be, starting to apply and so forth like that. We've heard a lot about your story, and it's awesome, the things that have happened through the whole process and the good that's come from it. Do you have some stories from like some of your clients you've worked with that just, they were in a dark place, they were in a really overwhelmed place, like Kristen mentioned, and now are finding new life out of this because of what you're working with?
Yeah, I mean, the majority of the things I've been able to help people on are very specific. Like they're looking for a piece of equipment, a chair. They were told, sorry, you got to wait 3 more years. And that's just not true. They don't have to. And so I think when I see a mom, I generally work with moms, although there are a few dads I've worked with. When I see them just feel like, okay, I see a path, like that is the best reward I could have. There's one mom in particular, she had never been approved for a grant because they had made more money than like a person that would qualify for Medicaid or anything like that. But the Department of Agriculture says it takes $240,000 to raise a child that's neurotypical with no diagnosis. On average, it takes $1.4 million to raise a child with a disability or diagnosis. Yep. That's insane. So you can make good money and be broke. Like you can be pouring out all this money and not get coverage for things, especially if you have private insurance. I mean, that gap is very, very hard. So I worked with a mom that they made decent money, but they were spending every penny on their child and her, she had a debilitating diagnosis and they were just trying to slow that down and they were doing everything they could. And she had applied, and this mom she's a bull. Like she was a go-getter. Like I was like, I think I could work with her because she's going to do every single thing I ask her to do. And she did. And she got more coverage than she even needed for this piece of device that she wanted. Several $1,000s, got it 100% covered. And she messaged me and was like, I've literally never been awarded a grant before, because she couldn't find any that didn't have income stipulation on it. So she paid out of pocket everything. And so that was really rewarding for me, because I know people might assume things about people because, oh, they have a good job, or, oh, they're, but the amount of money that it costs. I tell people when they're fundraising, always overestimate what you think you're going to need. If they tell you a van is going to cost you $30,000, put 35, because you got tags, title. If they tell you a wheelchair is going to cost this, you got to think about shipping. Like, there's all these things. Our treatment's going to be this. Well, you're staying in a hotel for 2 weeks at this place. You got to always overestimate, because the cost is just insane. What we go through to provide for our children. And then I guess I was able to help a dad recently that was in the hospital, had an emergency situation. His wife heard about me through just mutual friends, heard about what I had done, thought maybe they could help. And I just felt, we just had a conversation. I felt like I was really able to point him into some really great social work supports, lawyers, like disability right lawyers, how to get your child exclusively on certain waivers, stuff like that. I was able to help with that. And that was really rewarding, because that family came, once again, from no diagnosis to immediately thrust into this and everything changing. And there's just something to be said when you're able to help someone when that sense of panic is very, very real. That was probably one of the most rewarding things I've been a part of.
That's so good. That, I mean, like you said, it's the positive side of things. It's such a reward to see this.
Yeah, that panic state where you can get them off and like, I don't know what to do next. And actually, okay, there is a path forward. There's hope.
Mm-hmm.
And let us help you. Like, I think that's like letting your community help you, learning, like that's one of the biggest things, like learning how to say yes, and knowing what the next steps are. I think that's huge.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one of the things I just wanted to ask you is, what are you up to lately with what you're doing? And with that, are there any specific grants out there right now that you kind of want to highlight to these families in general? You're like, that's a huge question.
Well, I have thousands of grants, literally.
Of course.
Individual grants, which are so exciting to me. I did find one recently, and I think it's called PAN or PAL. And they had so many, it's a website that had so many grants within it, not for this specific therapy and treatment, but like SMA, which I know is a really hard, spinal muscular atrophy. It's really hard to come by grants that are specific. They had one for therapies, and I got so excited because I know so many people in the SMA community. They had, I can't think of one particular grant, but what I can tell you is if you go to the Connect website, you will find very specific grants for rare disease, everything from rare disease to ALS to cerebral palsy to cancer. We've been uploading, we have thousands of grants in there, and there you can sort them specifically. And so that's the whole pro of using the Connect website, which is 100% free for families. Okay. What was the first part of the question?
Yeah, just basically, what are you guys up to now with this Connect website? How does this work for families? What should they do to come and connect?
Yeah, so I met the Support Now staff with just mutual interests. We were both in social trying to help people, met them. It's an organization that does crowdsourcing. And so they've created this website where it's all in one. They have kind of like GoFundMe, Meal Train, and like a Facebook page or like a sharing page, all in one. But what I love about them is they have an option for the donor to round up. And if the donor rounds up, then 100% of the proceeds go to the family instead of having this fee. And even when they don't, it's still cheaper to use them than to use GoFundMe. So when I met them, I was like, well, that's a no-brainer. Like, because I remember I fundraised, it was like a $10,000 item, and they took like $600. And all I could think of was like, that's a special tomato seat for my kid. Yeah. Like, GoFundMe took that, and they presented as if I had all of it, and I didn't. And so I really fell in love with Support Now and the product that they had created with this site. And they asked, what's your dream? And I told them to, multiply myself so I could help everybody. And it would be in the form of a website. And so they built it and I filled it. And so we partnered together on Connect. We created Connect. And so I think first and foremost, creating a free connect platform. Free connect
Profile.
profile. Yes, thank you. I can't think of the word.
We're moms.
Yeah.
Get it. We'll just work off each other. It's all good.
Yeah, a free connect profile so that you get updates when we have new grants and you can start applying and sorting and just looking at what's out there for you and your child would be like first. But also, if you're in a position where you are needing to like fundraise for a large item, a large treatment, or you are just diagnosed or had an emergency situation like myself, I would highly, highly recommend raising funds. Because when you have these big moments, people want to support you. That's one of the things, like hindsight, I wish we would have like just really realized what the cost would be, because we had no idea, none. My pride was, I didn't want people, I was so concerned about my son that I couldn't even think outside the box. So having a friend or family member come around and be like, hey, we're gonna raise support for what you're going through right now, especially when there's a tragedy, is huge. So like starting a support registry, getting whatever you think it would be, like, hey, we're trying to help cover costs for the copay for the hospital stay, or we know that they're going to want hyperbaric oxygen when they get out of the hospital, or so and so's too heavy now and we have to have a wheelchair accessible van. Like we have to. And we have this much we can afford, but we need to make up the difference for them. Let's come together. I think those are like the two biggest things that I've been up to, is helping people and connect, and then really helping them know how to fundraise effectively, which we talked about a little bit earlier. That transparency, having a team of people that will come alongside you and say, yeah, I'll support you on this journey, whether you're creating the registry for yourself or a friend is creating it for you, finding 6 to 10 people, sending them a link and saying, hey, will you guys all share this on social? Like, we're going to share, and just tell them how you know me, or tell them how you know her. That's it. So you share that, because we've all seen like a GoFundMe, right? And nobody says anything. They just share it, and you just keep swiping. You just keep swiping. But if you say, hey, this is my sister, please take a minute to read what they're going through. It's so much. I appreciate you. People, that's like, oh, that's my friend's sister. Let me read about what they're going through. And then they're more likely to give and to support. And so that's where my energy has been focused, between registries and just really filling Connect, getting it better every day, making it more. We're adding more subcategories to try to and just to know, if you are looking at a subcategory and you don't find what you're looking for, go to the category above it, because we are filling those now, and we review our grants every 30 days, but it takes time. Every time I add a new subcategory, we have to go through all the grants that it could apply for and move them. And so we're adding more subcategories, adding more information. It's just getting better and better every single day. So I also consult organizations, and I've started to speak, which has been really fun, share my story and encourage other families that there is a path forward. I'm a firm believer, as I'm sure you guys are, that if we have to take this path, we might as well make it smoother for the person behind us. And so I've started to do public speaking, and that's been a really big joy of mine.
So fantastic. I love the fact that, well, you're just speaking from your heart and what you want to do and how you want to help people. And that's huge. One question as you're going through this, where are you finding all these different grants? I mean, is it is it somewhere on the internet? And I mean, or is it, are you very strategically have places that you're seeing that they continue to update? Because it's super exciting, and there's so much, it seems like there's out there, but we just don't know about it. And that's why I so appreciate what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I'm just being an internet sleuth. I mean, honestly, it is hours and hours and days and weeks of work to find these things. And so when you're intentional about it and you know what you're doing. So just over the years, I've become really well versed on how to sort and find things, how to find what I'm looking for. And so when I find them, basically, if we find like a resource page, well, I'll go through each grant. I'll see what's actually. So one of the biggest things, when you go to a resource page on a website, they'll say, we have resources for this. Just check out our resource page. Well, half of the grants are no longer in existence. The other half, it's like a 50-50 shot if you even qualify, whether it's diagnosis, age, like there's all of these limiting factors. And so that's what we've done on Connect is we've sorted them. If they're no longer existing grants, we've removed them. They're not in our system. If they're open or closed, we let you know so you don't waste your time trying to apply for something that's not accepting applications until March of next year. We are putting more and more criteria. So we've started to fill an age area. So when you go to view, you can see if there's an age limit, which is huge. I mean, we know that, and people say, oh, well, is it pediatric or adult? Well, that's different in our world, right? Some grants will go pediatric is 26, and some will say 22, and some will say 21, and some say 18. And so instead of saying pediatric or adult, we're putting the age.
Mm-hmm.
Some you can't apply till you're 5. What if you're 4, So we just want to make it, when you find some grants that you think you could possibly apply for, make it super simple to click view and say, okay, what are they asking? Are they asking for financial verification? I don't want to give that. Okay, I can move on. Are they asking for a letter of medical necessity? Do I have to get something from a social worker? How do you apply? Well, we have the application button right there. You don't have to sort through a website because a lot of these grants are made by moms and dads that just saw a need, filled a need. And sometimes the websites aren't the best. Like they're not easy to navigate. And so, or they don't even put it on the website. You actually end up having to call them and say, can I have an application? Well, we've put their email in the contact area. So you can just contact them right away or their phone number. And so I think if you're wanting to stay up to date, I would have a Connect account because we also send you an email once a week telling you if any new grants have been added that fit your diagnosis.
It's so great. Obviously, when you get exposed to all this information, you see some of the policies and some of the things that are missing. Is there something that stands out to you, some kind of policy or system change that would be implemented that would better help our families moving forward?
Oh, I mean, there's so many.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many. I think a child with I think there's so much I think.
Yeah.
I think every kid with certain disabilities should automatically have Medicaid. I mean, and I have a conservative background, but I know how it's set up,
Right.
so I can't think of a particular policy I'm advocating for, but I love finding that mom and dad that's on social media that are, breaking ceilings and barriers and fighting for these things. And I stay in my lane because that's not my lane, but I get behind those that are doing those things. And so I think if you're looking for like a difference, be the difference you want to see, right? My biggest thing was finding financial support to get the treatments my son needed. And so now people can do that from all over the world on Connect. I know there's some moms that are fighting constantly for like rare disease awareness and cerebral palsy understanding. And so I follow them, I support them. They have petitions, I sign them. I mean, that's really where my support comes in. There's so much though. I mean, so much things. I'm like, why are we paying for that? But then a kid in a wheelchair has to wait, even though they had a growth spurt, like, come on, like we can do better. And so, yeah, hope that answers the question.
It so does. I mean, it's such a huge question, but it so does. I mean, just from, your perspective as a parent and an advocate. And seriously, this is just a phenomenal resource.
Mm-hmm.
We always love to ask this of our guests, which is this question about what is one thing that you would share with families to help bring hope for their road ahead?
I think don't live in the what ifs.
Yeah.
Like, I think the only time I start to feel like I'm in the past more so, I was losing my way in hope was when I lived in all these things that they weren't real. And there was somebody had said something to me, and I can't recall who it was. Actually, I do recall. My girlfriend we were in the hospital, and she said, I've been praying that the joy of the Lord is Wyatt's strength. And I remember this was just my ignorance. I remember thinking, well, don't pray that. Pray for his healing. Pray for his healing. And I was frustrated by that. And then I saw him laughing and smiling and around some of his peers recently. And it just reminded me, if he has joy, like, who am I to say another path would be the best for him? Who am I to say XYZ would change it? I don't know what it would look like. So instead of living in those what ifs, I want to live in the present, to live with him, to we're not guaranteed tomorrow. None of us are. And so why live in this hypothetical when you could just do your best today? And even if it's overwhelming, like knowing, celebrating the little things, like the laughter, the smile, the cuddle, we're never guaranteed that. And so I think just learning to not keep your mind from the what ifs and just be in the present.
I love that.
Such great advice. Good. Perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, parents, definitely reach out, take a look at this resource. It is amazing. And Abby, thank you for your time and sharing your story, your family's story, and just looking at, how God has used this. It's huge. It's going to be such a huge help for so many families. We just know it.
Mm-hmm.
Super hopeful that it will be. So
absolutely. Check out the show notes to find resources and contact information for today's episode.
Yeah, and if you like the podcast, please share it with others and be sure to follow us so you won't miss an episode.
We love to hear from our listeners, so leave us a comment or rating and connect with us on social media or on our website at hopeonthehardroad.org.